Hi, I'm Dan, this is At Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the Moto Guzzi V85 TT, which is what? Well, it's the first time I've ridden a Moto Guzzi, so that's exciting in its own right. But beyond that, I'm a little bit confused, because is this just another example of a brand with a long history and kind of rich traditions using that as an excuse to slap another couple of grand onto the price of what is seemingly a pretty generic mid-sized modern adventure bike? Or is it an opportunity to enjoy some of that kind of Italian glamour and excitement that you get on a bike like the Ducati Multistrada V2 that I was riding recently, just at a much more affordable price? Now, given that I'm still relatively new to this whole motorbike world, this can all look a little bit confusing, but I do understand the importance of brand when it comes to buying decisions. Just look, for example, at the Vosges DS900X that I've been riding on the channel recently. That is objectively a very good motorcycle. It's got a similar kind of level of performance and similar purpose to the Moto Guzzi that you see here, and it does absolutely everything that it needs to do. But what does Vosges stand for? Absolutely nothing, arguably, beyond, if you're being less charitable, a collection of parts being sold at a very competitive price. Moto Guzzi, on the other hand, is a brand with a long history and a certain romance about it, which, shallow as it sounds, does matter to a lot of motorcyclists, because we are, at heart, a bunch of romantic old fools, aren't we? Does that justify the extra money over something like the Vosges or a Honda Transalp or any number of other perfectly competent modern adventure bikes? Well, this is all getting a bit deep and meaningful, isn't it? So before I disappear at my own channel, let's just have a look at the bike itself. Now, the V85 TT launched in 2019. It was updated for 2024 with new electronics and a Euro 5+ compliant engine. That motor is an 853cc air-cooled 90-degree V-twin, which it shares with the V9 and V7 retros. Question though, is it mounted longitudinally or transversely? I think there might be a slight disagreement here between car world and bike world, because I've heard a few people in bike world talk about engines like this as being transverse, I think because the cylinders stick out the side of the frame. But to me, as a car guy, well, it's longitudinal, isn't it? Because the crankshaft runs the length of the frame, not across it. Which is right? Well, let me know in the comments, we can thrash it out there. Whatever we settle on as the description for the engine mounting, it is uniquely Moto Guzzi and gives it a very distinctive visual trademark. The exposed V-twin, shaft drive, things like that, that's as instantly recognisable as a boxer twin on a BMW, isn't it? I also like the fact that for the 6-axis IMU, the TFT screen, the modern electronics, all that kind of thing that this bike has, it's still got a bit of a sense of the retro about it, which really does set it apart from all those other mid-size adventure bikes that it's up against, which, best will in the world to me, all look pretty interchangeable. You took the badges off them, you wouldn't know which one was which, would you? No such danger with this. You can tell instantly that this is a Moto Guzzi. I also appreciate the kind of junior Ducati Desert X vibes in the kind of the round lights and the graphics that it has. Obviously it's nothing like as competent off-road, but you know, it's got some of the same character, I think. Numbers? Well, the engine puts out 80 horsepower and 83 Newton meters. That sounds a little on the modest side, but it's comparable with, say, a Suzuki V-Strom 800, which you might also be considering, while the 170 millimeters of suspension travel and the 19-inch front and 17-inch rear put it at the kind of road end of the adventure bike spectrum, I would say. This V85 TT sits in the middle of the range. It costs £12,150, although as I record this, there are some deals around. That sits above the Strada version, which has kind of cast wheels and a slightly simpler spec, simpler electronics, things like that. And then on top of this, you can get the Travel, which is basically this bike, but with luggage, heated grips, and an extra configurable rider mode. Anyway, enough number crunching and chin scratching. Let's find out how it rides. Right, so my first ever ride on a Moto Guzzi. That feels like another nice milestone in my burgeoning biking career. And what are the first impressions? Well, they say first impressions count, and immediately when you fire this Moto Guzzi up. You just know it's something a bit different from all the other kind of mid-size adventure bikes that you might be looking at. It's just in the sound. Obviously it's an air-cooled engine, so it's a little bit more raw. It's a 90-degree V-twin, and just from that first blip it catches with a real boom, and then it sends that, with the shaft drive, sends that kind of quiver through the frame, even when you just fire it up from tick over. And it's not a big engine, you know, it's only an 853cc, so it's not, you know, it's not like a big boxer engine like in that GS I've been riding around on. So, but even with that, it's got that kind of that character, that kind of, it's like a handshake. Your very first interaction with the bike is like, ooh, this is different. And that's really cool. And it just makes such a difference from all those parallel twins, like the Vosges that I was riding on the commute just literally yesterday. Perfectly good bike, it's more powerful than this, it's more modern. But if you're buying a bike for more than just transport, one with an engine that sounds and feels like this, in those first few seconds when you fire it up, is really nice. And that's kind of that's what you want out of an Italian bike, isn't it? You want, I mean, we project all these ideas of Italian temperament and soul and all that kind of thing. They are still machines, they're mechanical objects. We're just kind of projecting our ideas of human characteristics onto them, but that kind of matters on a motorbike, particularly one with an Italian name on it. So first impressions are really good, and that's also important for Moto Guzzi because it's interesting, isn't it? While the Indians have done a very good job of reviving, repurposing classic British bike brands, it's as if the Chinese are doing the same with Italian brands. So you look at brands like Motomarini, Morbidelli, Benelli, all these classic names, they've all been bought up by Chinese brands and revived, which is great. It's good to have them back. The world would be less interesting without them. But while they look nice and they've got that evocative history behind the names, usually they tend to be just powered by fairly generic off-the-shelf Chinese engines. They might have a smattering of Italianness about them, but really it's just a branding exercise, whereas this Moto Guzzi feels genuinely Italian. You know, it's got that unique engine arrangement and the looks that gives you. It's got that history. So straight away it feels like the real thing and sounds it. But is it, as I suggested it might be in the intro, with that Italianness, is it like a cheap way to get a sense of Ducati style thrills? yes and no. I mean, let's face it, this is no Multistrada V2 in terms of performance. 80 horsepower against, what was it, 115 I think in the Multistrada, and this bike weighs 230 kilos against the Ducati's, what, 205 I think, so it's a big lump of bike compared with the Ducati. So in riding style, you can see where the extra money on the Ducati is going. It's a much sportier bike than this, but they're doing a different job, and the Guzzi is more a kind of touring, kind of all-round bike, I think. It's more upright, it's chunkier, it's just a bit more chilled, but as I keep coming back to it, does have that provenance, that Italian history behind it, which does make it a compelling alternative, certainly to the more everyday adventure bikes I keep comparing it to. So in that sense, it definitely has that something about it. And the engine is, yeah, not that powerful, 80 horsepower, but it's got loads of torque, it's got that character, it pulls nicely from any gear, particularly if you're in a higher gear, it just booms, it sounds really good. So just, oh, listen to that. That's worth your 2 extra grand over a Transalp or something, isn't it? So that's really nice. And in terms of the rest of the package, although it's quite a simple bike, it's very kind of back to basics. Doesn't feel like there are any frills when you're riding it, you know. It's got a nice solid manual shift, no frills, but it's still a modern adventure bike, so it's got that kind of, that really nice balance, I think, between retro and modern. And with 170mm of suspension, you've got enough to be dealing with the lumps and bumps. It's not an off-road bike like the Vosges or a V-Strom DE or something like that, but it's got enough to take the lumps and bumps out and mean that you can enjoy the road less travelled. In terms of the suspension, we've got some adjustment, I think, for rebound and preload in the fork, and then rebound and remote preload on the back, so it's a little bit fancier than the mainly non-adjustable alternative, so that's nice. Brakes feel good, good solid Brembos radially mounted on the front, so nice lever feel from those, so it's a very comfortable bike. It feels like you could rack up big days in the saddle, absolutely no problem. And then when you come to park it up, you can step back and admire it and think, yeah, that's a cool looking bike, isn't it? I did all right there. So yeah, I think in those kind of, what we started this video asking was, does brand and badge make it worth paying extra? Does that image and heritage, does that actually mean anything when you're riding the bike? And I think based on this first impression, this first go on a Moto Guzzi, I would say it seemingly does. There's just something about this bike which is, it would you know, it would encourage you to take it out for the sake of it. You know, you would, of a Sunday morning, you would just go out for a bit of a blast, which you might not with one of the more mainstream equivalents. I guess what else might you be considering? I guess there's things like the Triumph Tiger 900 with a triple. That's got a bit more verve about it. To be honest, I think in character this is probably more like a Scrambler 900 in terms of its vibe and its performance and things like that, just because of the retroness. But yeah, it's just a really nice, charismatic, feel-good bike. With just a good balance of retro character, but modern riding manners and the reassurance of things like prawning ABS and traction, things like that. They're little reassurances that just make life a little easier. So yeah, there we go. It's a quick first impression of the Moto Guzzi V85 TT. The sun is out, the roads are dry, so if you'll excuse me, I'm going to make the most of it. So yeah, that was my first ride on a Moto Guzzi, and what was it like? Well, to be honest, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I knew the bike was good looking and it, you know, has a bit of coolness about the brand and all that kind of thing, but looking at it, I wondered if it was perhaps going to be a bit kind of slow and crude, a bit heavy, all that kind of stuff. And to a certain degree, it was some of those things, but it was also brimming with character, which is kind of what I hoped for, given the history of the brand and all that kind of thing, and also because of the difference in the way it does things with that distinctive V-twin engine, the shaft drive, all that kind of thing that sets it apart from the other bikes in the class. And that brings me back to the beginning really, and asking whether all that sort of thing is enough to justify the extra money you would spend over a more conventional middleweight adventure bike. And it depends what you want really. I think if you're looking for a bike which is packed with tech, you know, has lots of configurable stuff, you know, you can plug your phone in, you can do your mapping, you can set stuff up, all that sort of thing, this probably isn't the bike for you. If you want a kind of sporty adventure bike, again, probably not the right choice. If you want to go off-road, again, probably better choices. But if you're looking for a bike with kind of character and soul, those indefinables, I think the V85 TT really delivers on those, and it's a really charming machine. I think it's impressively well finished as well. It all looks good. You know, there's some nice little touches like these sort of aluminium forgings for the foot pegs and all that kind of stuff. I like the big shock on the side, that looks pretty cool. You know, these kind of little finishing bits here. You know, it's all decent quality. If I was going to really nitpick, I'd say maybe the switch cubes on the bars are a little bit cheap and plasticky, but then, you know, that's pretty standard for most modern motorbikes, so it seems unfair to pull Moto Guzzi up on that. So yeah, overall it's an impressive machine. It's not a full-on premium machine, perhaps like a Ducati, but it definitely has something to set it apart from the crowd, which is kind of what you're hoping for really, isn't it? And I think for the fact that it stands out aesthetically from the crowd as well, that is something to celebrate. It's also a pretty usable machine. You know, the seat height, I think off the top of my head, I think it was about 830mm or something like that. You know, it feels pretty wieldy. Certainly feels like most people could get along with a bike of this size. So yeah, it feels like a nice usable bike and a very comfy way to rack up some big miles, and a very stylish one as well. So there we go, those are my impressions of the Moto Guzzi V85 TT. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit like. If you're not already subscribed, please do so, and hit the bell for notifications of when the next video drops. For now, I'll say goodbye, thanks for watching, and ride safe.